Writers, let's take out our writing intention sheet. Today's date is 10-27. Today as a writer, I'm working on using elaboration prompts to grow ideas. Today I want to teach you that you need to hold on to those thoughts for longer stretches of time. It helps to hold conversations with yourself about your own first thoughts. Some writers keep a list of ways to push our thinking close by while they write and use those elaboration prompts to prompt them to talk back to their own first ideas. Can anyone tell me what elaboration means? What do we think elaboration means? Elaboration means you're just adding details. It's a noun that means a discussion that provides additional information. Yesterday we worked on our entries. So we talked about the person and we came up with ideas or their reasons about that person, and then we wrote an entry. So we just kept talking about one idea for a long time. When a writer stays on one idea for a long time and finds a lot to think and say about that one idea, people say the writer is elaborating. Here's the secret. If you are thinking something, like thinking it's hard to be a good friend, the best way to get yourself to think a lot more about that is to have a really great talk with somebody about that idea, right? And that other person might say things like, yeah, I agree. And then she might say the idea, it's hard to be a good friend, in her words. Then you might nod and say, yeah, that is it. And who knows, you might say the idea again before giving an example. So here's what I need you to know. Essayists let the words on the page be sort of like the other person in the conversation. So they have a thought, and they put that thought on a paper. Then they listen to the paper saying their own thought to themselves and say, yeah, I agree, with themselves, or say, one example of that is, or that's partially true and partly not true. It is as if essayists are in conversation with themselves. That conversation with themselves is what allows them to elaborate, to say more about one idea, to connect the idea to other things, to say the idea in more than one way, to go from big ideas to specific examples. Sometimes it helps to keep a list of ways to push our thinking close by while we write and to use those elaboration prompts to extend our thinking, prompting us to talk back not just in conversations with others, but also when writing more about our own first ideas. Some ways to push our thinking are things like, in other words, that is, the important thing about this is, as I say this, I'm realizing this is giving me the idea that, an example of this is, and there's a few more, and you will all get one of these to put in your binder to help you push yourself with your thinking. As I go ahead and try to elaborate on my thinking, I'm going to go back to what my entry was about yesterday. So my person was my dad. The idea that I had yesterday, which was my reason one, my dad doesn't let what other people think bother him. To elaborate on my thinking, let's come up with some evidence. As I look at the chart, I'm going to use the first one, in other words. So my dad doesn't let what other people think bother him. In other words, he doesn't worry about making sure he does what people expect. So I just took my reason and I used my chart to push my thinking to figure out the evidence for why my dad doesn't let what other people think bother him. So I'm pushing myself and my thinking to talk more about why my dad doesn't let what other people think bother him. I'm going to look at my chart for more evidence and ways to push myself. As I say this, I'm realizing this means that sometimes he does things that are odd, like using frozen peas as an ice pack. Or I also can push my thinking to go more on this. An example of this is also that he wears a red plaid hunting cap to my school events. Another way to push my thinking is the important thing about this is that my dad stays true to who he is. Does this kind of look familiar from what we talked about the other day? This is the starting point of starting to write our essays. We have a thesis, our reasons, and evidence to go along with our reasons. Now it's your turn. I want your help to come up with our thesis about ice cream. I love ice cream. So our thesis was I love ice cream. And what was reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, and what was our evidence for each reason? You're going to work as a class to help push our thinking so we can use these examples to help push us into coming up with our evidence to make it a strong and long writing. Let's see how well we can work on this together.